That's not the only thing. They fed some folks. I give them credit for that. When it comes to political decisions, they made a decision to partition Palestine and give the Jews a place to return to of a homeland. Now, here was the big one. Oh, I love to tell you this. There was then a discussion on what the name should be. When the paper came to first of all, when the announcement was made, it's believed by the President of the United States, Truman, is about to give the Jews a homeland in Palestine. When the American delegation of the UN, at the UN, the American delegation heard it, they thought it was a joke. And when it passed, they all were about to resign. I mean, that's how crazy it was, okay? So they bring this paper. You got to understand something. They had never had a new nation form. They'd had a nation split in two, like Germany, but they'd never had a nation that did not exist come into existence. So they didn't have the paperwork. I mean, you can't go to file and say, bring that paperwork on a new nation out there, that one we got. They said, how do we do this? They didn't know how to do it, but it had to be on paper. So they bring it to the White House, and here's the catch. There is no name for it. The name is blank. So they said, do we call it Zion? Well, no, the Arabs don't like that name because of the Zionist. That's kind of negative. What about Judea? Well, we could call it Judea. That's what it used to be called, part of it. And somebody had enough sense to pull a Bible out. And they contacted some Jews and said, we don't even know what to call this. And they said, the name that the prophets... The name that the prophets said that it would be is Israel. And so on May 14th, 15th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion stood up and said, today we have a nation. Now Isaiah 66 said, shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. Somebody give the Lord a hand. The travail was the Holocaust. That was the travail that brought forth the nation. Now, let's go back. Okay, so now they've got, it's not Alia Capitolina. Now, after 1,940 years, it's Israel. Well, now you've got to deal with the capital. The capital's Jerusalem. In 1948, the Jews go back to the land, but Jerusalem is divided between the east and the west. Literally, where the Western Wall is today was Jordan. The Temple Mount was Jordan. The Mount of Olives was Jordan. The Kidron Valley was Jordan. The village of Silwan was Jordan. And the more contemporary area, western side, was Israel. But the Arabs put a big wall up in the middle, and the Jews had to do it too for security. Barbed wire fence. You had guys in towers on this side with binoculars looking at guys in towers from this side. Every now and then you'd have a sniper try to shoot somebody from this side and a sniper trying to shoot somebody from that side. Well, my guide Gideon said to me, when I was in the military, we had a rabbi come by and he said, guys, if you don't mind, I need to go up in your tower and pray. And they said, well, you're going to risk your own life because you're not in a military uniform. When you're in a military uniform, we have an agreement not to kill each other, okay? But they're going to think you're doing something. He said, just let God take care of that. So he had his prayer book. He gets his binoculars. He's looking at the Temple Mount. Now, this is from the Jewish side. And he starts praying. And he comes down. He wants to do it again. And they said, we thought, what is this dude doing? So finally, he comes down and he says, men, listen to me. Gather around, for this is a word from the Lord. He said, it will not be long until that part of the city will be in our hands. And this will be a united city, and it will be the capital of Israel. Because the prophets are about to be fulfilled. There were Dead Sea Scrolls that predicted certain things. There were Jewish sages that predicted certain things. And the season of it was about to happen. My guide said to me, this was pre-1967, and we thought the guy had lost his mind. And my guide said to me, along with other Jewish guides who do my tours, we never dreamed in our lifetime that we would ever see a wall that separated Jerusalem come down. We never dreamed we would freely drive without a passport on the Mount of Olives. We never dreamed we would go to Jericho from the Mount of Olives and go down it in our cars. We never dreamed it because the Arabs hated us and we hated them. He said, now we had some agreements with them on some things, but when it came to the land, we could not agree on this land. But there was a war that was fought by a man named Joshua. And that war was 6 days long, and on the 7th day, they won the victory. Israel decided to do something. They decided to preempt an attack of Nasser, the head of Egypt. Nasser had his 300 and some planes on the runway, and he says, I'm going to push the Jews into the sea. Same thing another man named Ahmadinejad in Iran is saying right now. And Israel said, we're not going to let it happen. And as the Egyptian pilots were drinking their coffee and smoking their stogies near the runways, the Israeli fighter pilots flew at low range over the desert at high speed and started bombing. Now this is what's amazing. The Egyptians had fake aircraft in case something would happen, and the Israelis knew every true aircraft and never hit the fake ones but hit all the real ones. They knocked out the entire Egyptian Air Force in just a few hours. Nasser gets on the radio and says, we have now attacked Israel. We are pushing the Jews to the Sinai. He called King Hussein of Jordan, who had the most to lose in this deal, because he controlled what is called the West Bank today. He said, King, you join with me to fight the Jews, and you go into Jerusalem and fight against them, or if you don't, I'll assassinate you when this war is over. King Hussein, a very peace-loving man, had no choice. He joined the war. The word came over the intercom, take the planes and go do Jordan. They knocked out 30 of Jordan's planes, same day. Then the word came about Syria. He contacted the Syrians and he lied to them. He said, this is before the days of all the contemporary satellite pictures and all. He said, I've got the Jews on the run. They're on the run. I've already got them through the desert, pushed them toward the sea. Join me in the war and take the northern half. And Syria, acting like a bunch of dummies, decided they were going to join in that war. Weird things happened in that war. Like my friend who said we came upon 40 Russian tanks in a narrow pass. And the top of the tank, I don't know what you call it, I call it the lid. It was popped open, and there were boots where these Egyptian men had taken knives and cut their bootstraps where they could run in the desert. And all they find is boots and 40 tanks. And they've got 40-some miles on them, and they put them in like park position, and they left the engines running. These Egyptians left their tanks with the engines running, and the Israelis filled them up with gas and drove off with them, but they couldn't understand what happened. So when they finally captured these men in the desert, because they were 40-some miles away from Cairo, close to 50, when they captured them in the desert and they interrogated them before releasing them, they said, what happened? They said the whole tank brigade was coming through the pass, and all of a sudden one of the commanders said, oh God, look, they're coming after us. We didn't know what he meant, and we looked out and saw thousands and thousands of men in white parachuting out of the sky. And we didn't know what was going to happen. We thought it was an ambush. And we thought we'd have a better chance of surviving by running. And they were raised in the desert. They knew how to run without boots on in the desert. They were Bedouins. They said we could survive better running than blowing up in the tank. And they wanted to know, where did the Israelis get all those men in white? Well, I've talked to several Israeli men since then. They said Israel never has, never will have men who are dressed in white. They have no idea who the men in white were. But in Daniel chapter 12, there's an angel called Michael the archangel that the Bible says is the guardian of the nation of Israel. And I believe it was a supernatural manifestation that they saw. Oh my. So ladies and gentlemen, in 6 days, the war was over. Israel controlled the Sinai Desert, they controlled the West Bank, they controlled the Golan Heights. And this is all the ancient territory in the time of King David and in the time of Solomon. So, watch what happens. Oh my, talk about the 6-day war. So suddenly, Israel is no longer Alia Capitolina, it's Israel. Jerusalem is no longer that name that was given it, Aliyah. It is now the city of Jerusalem. The Jews who had no access to their own city, are you listening? Now have a united city since 1967. Now there's only one more phase that has to happen to complete the cycle. And that phase was the return of the Jews since 1948. I'll give you these verses real quick. Jeremiah 16, 14 through 16. Isaiah 43, 5 through 6. Isaiah 49, 13. All predict God bringing the Jewish people back to their original land. Here are the 4 major returns. Operation Magic Carpet, 1959 to 1950. The Yemenite Jews returned, 49,000 of them came back to Israel. Operation Moses, 1985 to 86. 8,000 Ethiopian Jews returned. Operation Solomon, 1991. Ethiopian Jews, 14,325 returned. Exodus 2, as it has been called, the Soviet Jews, literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands have returned. As a matter of fact, I love the prophecy in Jeremiah where it says that the exodus out of the north country will be greater than the exodus out of Egypt. Now, some say that applies to the Babylonian captivity, but if you look at the setting and context of it, it is an exodus of Jewish people from a major northern country. Moscow is north of Jerusalem. And when the Russian Jews began to return in the late 1980s and into the 90s and even to today, they have now, according to statistics, exceeded the number of men that came out of Egypt in Exodus chapter 12. Come on. Somebody needs to praise the Lord.